Welcome to Newcastle Family History Society podcasts. The Newcastle Family History Society, located on Awabakal land in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, provides support for those interested in family history. In the late 19th century, Newcastle society was shaped by a number of influential families, among them the Woods, a family whose success helped transform the city during its years of rapid growth. In 1888, their story took an unexpected turn when John Wood Jr. married a young woman already famous across Australia, the popular Shakespearean actress Essie Jenyns. Their wedding at St Andrew's Cathedral in Sydney became a remarkable spectacle, drawing enormous crowds of admirers eager to catch a glimpse of the celebrated bride. But Essie's story is far more than a dramatic wedding day. From the theatre stages of Australia to the social and charitable life of Newcastle, Essie Jenyns would become a figure whose influence reached well beyond the spotlight. In this episode of Notable Novocastrians, Mel Woodford explores the life of the actress who captured the public imagination and became an important part of Newcastle's social history.
In a recent podcast, we heard about the Wood family, whose legacy helped transform the second half of the 19th century in Newcastle. They were free settlers from England who had arrived with very little, but became rich and as such became a central part of Newcastle's society and development. The family was already well established when John Robert Wood Jr. of Jesmond House on the Hill married the popular Shakespearean actress Essie Jenyns on Wednesday the 5th of December 1888 in a memorable service at St Andrew's Cathedral in Sydney. I say memorable for two reasons. Firstly, because of the number of society guests present, and secondly, because of the enormous number of uninvited devotees who arrived to see the bride, causing considerable disruption and serious concern for the bridal party, the guests, and the church authorities. Due to the popularity of the bride, reports of the wedding were circulated in newspapers all around the country. The Sydney Morning Herald of the following day provides us with a detailed account.
If any doubt could be retained as to the popularity of the young actress, yesterday's scene at the cathedral must have dispelled it. Inside and outside of the church were excited, enthusiastic crowds, and scarcely more homage could have been paid to one of royal position. At 10 o'clock in the morning, there were people waiting to find place in the cathedral when the doors should be open. At 1:30 o'clock, there were dense crowds about the edifice. When the bridegroom came, accompanied by Mr. Lee O'Neill, it was difficult to make room for them to make their way to the altar. When the bride came with Sir George Innes and her one bridesmaid, Miss Shepherd Smith, the police had to make passage for her through the great crowd of people. Before the doors were opened, there was a densely packed crowd in front of each. At the southern entrance facing Bathurst Street, it is estimated that between 600 and 700 persons were present, of which number there were probably not more than 50 who were ticket holders, and to these the cards of entree were, of course, useless. The large concourse found it impossible to move forward or to retreat, and as it was seen that a good many ladies were in a fainting condition, the cathedral officials came to the conclusion that the only remedy for the uncomfortable state of things then existing was to open this and other means of ingress. Immediately this was done, the people rushed pell-mell into the body of the cathedral, and not only were the pews quickly crammed, but hundreds of persons, forgetful of the nature of the edifice in which they were assembled, stood upon the seats and desks, while others clung to the brass rods which separate the choir from the congregation. Even the sanctity of the bishop's throne and the dean's chair was invaded, and over a dozen people took possession of the pulpit and the stairs leading to it. In anticipation of the crush, all the vergers and several members of the cathedral chapter undertook the onerous duty of preserving something approaching to a semblance of order. But this, owing to the mass of people and the prevailing excitement, was impossible. After the ceremony was over, there was a rush towards the communion rails, and the bride fainted and had to be carried into the vestry, and she only recovered after the lapse of about 10 minutes. The result of the treatment to which the furniture of the building had been subjected was duly apparent after the people had departed. The curved woodwork of the pulpit was found to be destroyed in several places, and the stone basement upon which it stands chipped and broken. The governor's pew sustained considerable damage. The carpet was torn, and some of the woodwork completely demolished. 2 of the large forms were also smashed to pieces, and several gas standards so much injured as to be rendered useless. Some of the people actually mounted upon the American organ which stands near the southern entrance and caused serious injury to the instrument, and a portion of the choir curtains with brass rings attached were torn down. A considerable quantity of the sittings will require revarnishing, owing to the treatment they received from those who used them to elevate themselves above other spectators. As for the handsome floral decorations placed in the cathedral by Messrs. Searle and Sons, and which were so much admired prior to the ceremony, they almost entirely disappeared in a very brief space of time, and very little remained to indicate the amount of taste and trouble which had been bestowed upon the work by the florists, beyond the crushed blossoms with which the floor was covered. It is apparent that means might have been taken to prevent such proceedings.
Despite her somewhat rocky entry into the family, Essie Jenyns, now known as Mrs. John Wood, was to become the centre of Newcastle's social scene, following her arrival home from a lengthy honeymoon abroad. To understand the enthusiasm which surrounded her wedding day, we firstly need to step back in time and find out more about the young woman whose wedding had created such a stir. Elizabeth Esther Helen Jenyns was born on the 5th of October 1864 in Brisbane. She was the daughter of Charles Jenyns, a chemist, and his wife Emily. Essie's father died when she was only 6, leaving her mother with 2 young children to support. Emily took to the stage as Kate Arden and joined Holloway's acting troupe, later marrying its founder, William James Holloway, when Essie was 14. It was not long until the beautiful and talented Essie was treading the boards. We find many references to Essie's performances throughout Australia on Trove, the National Library of Australia's repository of newspapers and other historical resources. In August 1884, Essie performed in Shakespeare's comedy, Much Ado About Nothing, at the Royal Theatre, Ipswich, in Queensland.
Among the audience were His Excellency Sir Anthony Musgrave and party. It is the ambition of every manager to produce a Shakespearean piece, and here was an occasion not to be lightly set aside, more especially as a good attendance was assured by the fact of Miss Essie Jenyns' popularity in this town, and besides, it was a farewell benefit. As Beatrice, Miss Essie Jenyns looked very charming, and acted with a vivacity and ease not unsuited to the part. Her efforts were rewarded with a shower of wreaths and bouquets, and she was frequently applauded.
This was the year that Essie, together with her mother and stepfather, visited Europe, where she saw such actresses as the famous Sarah Bernhardt and Mary Anderson perform, as well as watching the direction of French instructors at the famous Conservatoire in Paris. Although she did not perform overseas, she returned home in readiness for an extended season in the capital cities of the East Coast and Adelaide. The Sydney Mail and New South Wales Advertiser of September 25, 1886, tells us that Essie particularly impressed her audiences in the play A Ring of Iron, where she excelled as an intelligent and sympathetic actress in the Frank Harvey Australian drama. From there she would be cast as Juliet in the Henry Irving arrangement of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet in Sydney. The production was produced and directed by Mr. Holloway, and it would be on a scale of unusual splendour and expected to attract the warm support of theatre patrons. In September of the following year, Essie began a season at the newly opened Criterion Theatre on the corner of Pitt and Park Street, Sydney. This followed a 17-week season in Brisbane. Mr. Holloway worked his young stepdaughter hard, and this may have contributed to Essie's decision to marry at an early age, just when Holloway was thought to be considering launching into the overseas market. While performing in Hobart in 1887, Essie had been presented with a copy of the second folio of Shakespeare's original works, published in 1632, by a group of admirers, one of whom was said to be John Wood Jr. from Newcastle. The State Library of New South Wales now owns this copy, which was donated by Essie herself to the people of Sydney not long before her death, in recognition of their loyalty. During the early 1890s, Essie and John toured Europe aboard their yacht Imogen. Essie's account of their trip around the Mediterranean was published in her Yachting Ways and Yachting Days, written as diary entries. It is now out of print, but available to read online from the National Library of Australia through Trove. It makes for fascinating reading. Back home again in Newcastle, Essie had left behind the world of theatre for the most part, but embraced the position of society hostess and charity patron with great alacrity. On Saturday the 3rd of October 1896, the Newcastle Herald and Miners Advocate reported on a grand ball at Jesmond House.
One of the most enjoyable and at the same time successful social events that has transpired in Newcastle during the last 25 years took place last evening. The occasion was a grand ball given by Mr. and Mrs. John R. Wood at Jesmond House. Immense preparations had been made for the event. The grounds attached to the mansion were occupied by a newly erected marquee which was afterwards utilised as a supper room. It was remarkably attractive in daylight, but the grandeur was considerably enhanced in the evening by its being illuminated by electric lights. The ballroom presented a really magnificent appearance. The decorations were both unique and elaborate, the principal feature being the festooning of the walls and windows with roses. About 100 couples sat down to supper, which did credit both to the hospitality and general good taste of the worthy host and hostess.
Thereupon followed a long and detailed list of those present and the costumes they wore. It was a veritable who's who of Newcastle society. Essie, of course, was dressed as Juliet. The costumes selected by those in attendance provide us with an interesting glimpse into the popular plays and literature of the day. In December 1901, a garden fete was hosted at Jesmond House by Mr. and Mrs. Wood to raise much needed money for the Newcastle Cathedral Building Fund. Building works had been at a standstill for almost 10 years. Essie had a 40-foot stage erected on the lawn where dramatic and musical entertainment was provided over the 2 days of the fete. A special appearance by well-known Queensland pianist Elsie Hall drew much attention. The Dictionary of Biography states that apart from charity, patriotic and benefit performances, Essie emerged only once from retirement in 1914 to play in a special Sydney presentation of The Merchant of Venice with the famous English actress Ellen Terry. Said to be a notable occasion in the history of drama in Australia, the Daily Telegraph on Wednesday the 29th of July 1914 reported that Miss Ellen Terry's appearance at Her Majesty's Theatre the previous afternoon saw
the members of her own profession united to do honour to the distinguished artist. Enhanced interest was given to the performance by the return to the stage for this occasion of Miss Essie Jenyns, who was herself the object of a demonstration of enthusiasm. The Governor-General, who was in one of the boxes, went behind the scenes after the matinee and chatted with Miss Terry and Miss Jenyns. Amongst the great audience were the President and other officers of the Shakespeare Society.
Essie and John and their 2 children spent a good deal of time in England, but Essie returned to Australia for a visit in mid-1920. She'd been staying on the North Shore in Sydney when taken ill and hospitalised. An operation was deemed necessary, but she died of complications the following day, Friday the 6th of August, in a private hospital in Killara, aged just 55. Her husband John, her son, also named John, 22 years of age, and their daughter Esther Lyle, 32, was still at their London residence in Putney Hill. Essie was interred in the Wood Vault in the Presbyterian section of Sandgate Cemetery on Monday the 9th of August, following a short service at Christchurch Cathedral. The vault already held the remains of John's parents and was originally intended to house the remains of Essie's husband as well as herself. John Wood, however, remained in London and remarried in June of 1927, some 8 months before his own death. He was buried in England. 2 years after her interment in Sandgate, Essie was removed from the vault. Her remains were cremated before being reinterred with her brother Robert Jenyns in Waverley Cemetery. The wood vault in the Presbyterian section of Sandgate Cemetery was researched for the 2017 Sandgate Cemetery Tours, which are conducted annually by the Newcastle Family History Society. Essie's contribution to Newcastle was not forgotten. The Newcastle Sun of Monday the 11th of April 1921 sums it up beautifully when it informs us that a
portrait of Mrs. J. R. Wood, Essie Jenyns, to be unveiled tonight. The memory of Mrs. J. R. Wood, Essie Jenyns, is to be rightly perpetuated in Newcastle. At the Australasian Society tonight, her portrait will be unveiled. Mrs. Wood, during her all too brief life in Newcastle, was one of our most honoured citizens. With her charm of manner and striking personality, she added much to our educational advancement, our social uplifting and the growth of an unselfish spirit, which is a mark of the true Christian. Self-abnegation being the beginning and end of a Christian life. Mrs. Wood, among other things, founded a free kindergarten. Young people now in Newcastle can look back to many hours spent in picking up the rudiments of an education which has now advanced them to the higher schools, and some still further to the university. Her thoughtful care in this direction has been the means of establishing not only a finer citizenship, but a band of scholars who will go forth to teach the world. The Australian soldier will never forget her. During her temporary residence in England, she threw open her home in order to entertain them. She lived a beautiful life. Her thoughts were for the people, particularly those growing up. A scholarly woman herself, with a beautiful soul, she left an impression wherever she went.
From the crowded aisles of St Andrew's Cathedral to the gracious lawns of Jesmond House, Essie Jenyns lived a life played out on many stages. Though her acting career dazzled audiences across Australia, it was in Newcastle that her influence endured most deeply. Not in applause or bouquets, but in education, charity and community spirit. Remembered for her generosity, intellect and compassion, Essie Wood reminds us that legacy is not measured by wealth or fame alone, but by the lives quietly shaped along the way.
Though Essie Jenyns first gained fame on the stage, it was in Newcastle that she left her most lasting impression. As Mrs. John Wood of Jesmond House, she became a well-known figure in the city's social and charitable life, supporting education, community causes and patriotic efforts. Essie's story reminds us that influence is not measured only by applause or fame, but by the quiet difference one person can make in a community. You've been listening to Notable Novocastrians on Newcastle Family History Society podcasts.